I'm Ted Char, your host, and with us today is Mary Mosiman. She is the auditor for the state of Iowa. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and look forward to having you tell us a little bit about your work today.
Okay, well, as your state auditor, I audit. Every day and all day, we audit all of state government, and we oversee the audits of local governments, at least those government entities that have audit requirements. And by that, I mean the counties, the cities, and the school districts. And when it comes to cities, not all of our cities have audit requirements. Only cities with population of 2,000 or more have audit requirements. If they're less than 2,000, it will be based on their budgeted expenditures, and they will be subject to periodic examinations, which is different than an audit, but it does help provide a little bit of outside oversight of their financial transactions. And it lets a CPA firm or the state auditor's office into their city offices once every 8 years at least. So cities are a little bit of an anomaly, but that's what we do. We audit, and we have about 100 employees. They are feet on the ground throughout the year in the different government entities, whether it's a state agency or the different counties or the cities that we audit. And we try and help provide accountability to those government entities or with those government entities, because every government entity uses your tax dollars. And we want to help make sure that those tax dollars are being used to the public purpose intended and for no other reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I got all kinds of questions related to
you
that. But we want to find out a little bit about you first.
Okay.
Can you tell us about your background?
Yes.
Yeah, how you came to be state auditor.
Good question. I started out politically as the Story County auditor. I sought that position in 1999 because I wanted the financial responsibilities. I knew that the county's budget was multi-million. At the time, it was about $32 million, and I thought it should have an accountant at the helm of that budget. The county auditor has no decision-making authority, but they do the maintenance of a county's budget, typically, at least in Story County they do. So I sought that position and was very pleased to prevail in that particular election, and I served as Story County auditor for 10 years. And I absolutely loved that. We did the budget, we did the financial preparation, we did the payroll and the payables. Very worthwhile position, closest to the people at the local level and the expenditures that impact them at the local level. So I was very happy there as the county auditor and thrilled to serve up there for 10 years. But in 2010, the Secretary of State, the newly elected Secretary of State, Matt Schultz, wanted somebody with election experience. As a county auditor, I also administered the elections. That's one of the county auditor's responsibilities as well. So he asked if I would serve as one of his deputies. I said yes, and I served with him for a little over 2 years before the resignation of my predecessor, Dave Vout. I am a CPA. I do truly value the financial aspects of local governments and state government. So I threw my hat in the ring to be considered for the appointment as state auditor. The governor said yes, and so I did my very best to not only do the job at hand, but also to campaign to be elected to the position. So I was just newly elected November of 2014, and absolutely delighted to serve everybody in Iowa as the state auditor.
Mm-hmm. How is Iowa doing financially? Are we in the black? Are we in the red? Is there a deficit? What's the situation?
Very good question. And my answer won't be complete because we're kind of in a time frame here where the legislature has adjourned, but the governor is still in the time frame where he's either signing bills or vetoing bills. Until he is done with that, we will not have a final action budget. But based on the proposed budget, which I spent a bit of time looking at, we have a very decent revenue growth in the state of Iowa. Our expenditures, it depends whether you look at our expenditures compared to our revenues. It depends whether you look at only our new revenues for an upcoming fiscal year, or if you consider the surplus funds that we have available at the end of a fiscal year. If you add our new revenues coming in for the upcoming fiscal 16 and add the surplus dollars that will be available at the end of fiscal 15, then we have a surplus. Without that surplus, though, our expenditures would exceed our revenues. In other words, we have a sizable state government with our Health and Human Services Department, our Education Department, and all of the other departments. Without the surplus carry forward, we would slightly exceed our revenues. But that is only based on the proposed budget that the governor outlined in, I believe it was early January. I will not know what the impact is based on the adjournment of the General Assembly and the governor's signatures or vetoes for probably close to a couple more weeks. Once he's done with his signatures or vetoes, then we'll analyze the final action budget.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty good news. How many states are in the black, do you know?
I don't know. I know Iowa is definitely one of the top states when it comes to financial management. That's from numerous sources. Some people say that we're the third or fourth most financially, or best financially managed states. Others say different numbers, but we're right up there. And that's because of a couple of different reasons. Even though we're using a portion of our surplus carry forward to help with our ongoing expenditures this upcoming year, we do have reserve funds that are filled to capacity because the surplus carry forward is in addition to our reserve funds. A lot of people refer to those reserve funds as the rainy day funds. Those are our cash reserve funds and our economic emergency funds. Those are filled for several consecutive years now to maximum statutory capacity, which is very good. Not every state can say that. Even Iowa can't say that for its entire history. So the last several years, General Assembly, working together with the governor's office, we've had our reserve funds filled. Our pension systems are also in a good state, being approximately 80-some% funded. Now, I realize that's a significant unfunded liability, which is of concern to every taxpayer in the state of Iowa, but we are better than other states. So that's why I'm saying that is one of the reasons that we're considered one of the better financially managed states in the nation.
Well, yeah, I mean, 80% sounds pretty good. I come from Illinois, you know.
Sure. Yeah, so it all is in your perspective, but that unfunded liability is something that people need to pay attention to because it does impact everybody in Iowa because there's only two components of revenue for a public pension system, and that's the employees and the employers. And every taxpayer is an employer because they fund the salaries.
Huh.
Yeah. So keep that in mind when you're thinking, yeah, it's 80%, but you got to keep in mind the 18 or so percent unfunded liability, which will impact taxpayers.
Yeah. So what does it take? What kind of things? I mean, I know you've described some things here. Reserve funds at capacity, pensions are well managed. In terms of the lawmaking process, is there something about that has helped Iowa to be fiscally sound?
This is going to be an opinion, but we do have a Senate that's controlled by Democratic Party and House that's controlled by the Republican Party, and our governor is Republican. In other words, we have a mixed political decision-making body, because it's 151 individuals, and they have to work together to get anything accomplished. In other words, they have to compromise. Now, depending on one's opinion, that's good and bad. I think for the public, it's always good when there's a balance in the decision-making process. In other words, it's not simply one political agenda over another one. This way, we're going to have our decision-makers have to compromise to get anything done. Now, they did extend their legislative session beyond their original time frame, largely because of education funding. I'm one of the people that's concerned about that being an ongoing topic, not just for this second year of the 2-year budget process, but also just long term. Because one thing that you'll hear me say repeatedly after we analyze the final action budget is we have to be concerned about our sustainability in Iowa because of education funding combined with health and human services funding. 20 years ago, if you combine the HHS, the Health and Human Services budget, with the education budget at the state of Iowa, it was less than 50% of Iowa's total expenditures. And now it's approaching well, it's over 75% in 20 years. Now, I realize 20 years is a long time, but if you look at the continued growth of both education spending and HHS spending, which is our Medicaid, we are going to have a sustainability issue because our primary source of revenue is taxpayer dollars. And that's going to impact everybody in Iowa.
Oh, yeah. So I have to ask in response to that, what about preventive health care? Are there some things that we can do to encourage that to maybe bring more sustainable numbers there?
Right. And one of the initiatives in the state of Iowa is being the healthiest state in the nation. We were talking before that we started live here, the data.iowa.gov. On that particular webpage is a link to healthcare or to health in Iowa. That particular site will give you lots of different information about healthy initiatives. What do workplaces have in Iowa as far as healthy initiatives? Do they have smoke-free environment? In other words, there's lots of information there about what can be done at an individual level, at a workplace level, and basically at a community level to help make sure that we are taking ownership of our health, which will have an automatic impact on our health care costs.
Yeah, so one of the alternatives to just providing information is grants. So one of the things that I've wondered about for a long time is, don't we have somewhat of a granting system that's designed, at least to some degree, to allow for programs to be funded that are known to work, and could we not channel more state funds, federal funds, whatever the case may be, to programs that are known to work through grants?
Yes, that would be a great concept. Yes, there are grants in place to help with things like this. I won't be able to, without a little bit of research, give specifics on that. But I think I hear where you're coming from. I would like to speak specifically about something similar, tax credits. That's one of the things that the state auditor's office is required to do, is to identify tax credit programs that are to benefit something, whether it's economic development, whether it's historical building preservation. Tax credits benefit something. So if you're talking about grants, similarly to talking about credits, there are methods of channeling funds to make sure that resources are going where they could be going or should be going to help benefit one's initiative. But one thing that I also, as an auditor, like to speak about is the accountability of either a grant or a credit, and making sure that it's working the way that it's supposed to work. Because it's one thing to have a grant in place or tax credits in place, but unless you are evaluating how that program, that tax credit program or that grant program is functioning, then I have to wonder what's the cost benefit of that program, that grant program or that tax credit program. As your state auditor, we are required to identify all the tax credit programs and sample or do a sampling to make sure that they are functioning the way that they were intended to function, and that the return on investment is being analyzed by the particular department. And I've only been your state auditor for a couple of years, and these are something that we do in addition to our statutory work. But that is something that I have noticed in my brief time as your state auditor that we need to do a better job of, is analyzing and making sure that and I'm going to speak specifically about tax credits, that the tax credit program is working and that the investment intended is paying off for the people of Iowa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that would be kind of a case-by-case
absolutely
type thing.
But that's the only method that a grant or a tax credit is going to be beneficial to the people of Iowa, is to make sure that not only we put it in place, but that we're analyzing it as time goes on, and that we're not just doing the same thing that we did last year because that's the easiest method. So,
yeah, I mean, one of the advantages that the U.S. has had, globally,
Right.
has been our combination of a large number of nonprofits.
Correct.
And the intersection of those with business and government. And, it's obviously some of that has occurred, but then, we also all know about the failed housing projects after the expansion of welfare. Good intentions, but a miserable failure, that led to gangs and violence and people that, became, victimized in a sense by a victimization kind of atmosphere.
Right.
So it's like what, some changes have occurred, but what kind of things could be done to facilitate a more efficient channeling of government funds to programs that work through grants?
And I'm going to go right back to the analyzing. It's wonderful to establish programs. They all have great intent. How government seems to differ from private industry is government rarely analyzes and acts on that analysis the way a private industry was. And that's simply because private industry typically has profit and loss to deal with. So if something's not profitable, they're going to change their direction. They're going to do something differently. Government doesn't always analyze the way they could and should to make sure that their program is as effective as it's intended to be and what they can do to make it more effective. In other words, once we put a program on the books, once we put a program into action, do we analyze the cost effectiveness of that program? Typically, at any level of government, we do not. Government simply doesn't function that way. There's no profit loss motivator. Government is all about service to the people, whether it's at the local level or at the state level or at the federal level. So that analysis is simply not commonplace once a program has been established.
Sure. No, I like that because it's simple and it's measurable.
Right.
On a case-by-case basis, you could put something together that would reflect a genuine return on investment.
Right.
And then if it's clearly written, grants are a rigorous process. So,
yes.
So the ones that I've run into are well written. A lot of hard work went into them, and so they have a clear purpose. They have a clear process, and that should set it up for that kind of measurement, I would think.
Certainly. But sometimes the money in a grant is authorized before one actually sees everything that's necessary. So you have to almost wonder, do we need to do the analysis of what is necessary and then the amount of money for the grant be authorized? Because right now I know a lot of people or a lot of entities apply for a grant knowing what the dollar amount is, and then they develop what is necessary for the procedures or the use of the grant monies.
So, I guess then that brings up the question, if we have that clear structure of evaluation, and then we have some good numbers behind that, that's pretty objective. It's kind of hard to argue with that. Isn't that the sort of thing that would do this facilitation of getting money to programs that are known to work? I mean,
right.
It just seems that why should it be hard to get money to programs known to work? You know what I'm saying?
And especially with grants, like you said, there's a rigorous reporting. There's a rigorous application process. There's typically reporting required, ongoing reporting. And in order to continue to receive funds, typically that reporting is required. It's just what is being done with the reporting. Is analysis being done in order for changes to be made if necessary, if it's found to be that the program is not as effective or is not operating as intended? Changes in government are more difficult than in a private industry.
Yeah. So how much of your office's work is devoted to that kind of analysis right now?
When it comes to grants, there's a lot of, we do the audit of every state agency, and a significant piece of our workload, I'm going to say approximately 2/3 of our workload, and we average about 130 to 150,000 audit hours per year. About 2/3 of that is spent at the state level, and of that quantity of hours, a good portion of it goes into, I'm going to call it the single audit requirements. In other words, analyzing the federal dollars that come into the state of Iowa. We talked initially about the state of Iowa's financial status. Iowa is, if you count not only the general fund, but all the other miscellaneous funds like the road use fund or the primary road fund, Iowa is approximately $8.4 to $8.5 billion. The federal government revenues are on top of that. So an additional $7 billion will be from the federal government. That's what we spend a good portion of our time verifying, that the different departments handled their federal grants, their federal awards appropriately. So we spend a good portion of our time. But again, that's making sure that they followed the procedures right, and that the dollars that they spent were authorized appropriately. Were they authorized by the federal, or were they authorized by the state? And did they go to the correct expenditure based on that authority? So,
So, is there a mechanism that you analyze the federal money going to a particular state, and then does the federal government analyze those type of figures? The return on investment from those funds, and thus, is there something to say, hey, we're not going to give Illinois much more money on this particular program because it's basically been wasted, kind of thing.
As the return on investment, I can't speak to that because that's what I think is not present in a lot of these things. In other words, what we are seeing, what we are auditing is that they followed the proper authority. No, that they went through the proper channels to get the federal monies, and then they followed the proper authority in expending those funds.
Yeah,
that's what we verify.
But do you hear from a federal agency saying, "Hey,
no,
here's how Iowa did," and
what is Iowa's return on investment for the different? No, no. There's, in other words, there's inspector generals. There's a government accountability office. There's no auditor per se at the federal level that's doing what we're doing here at the state level. But they do have a different method. In other words, the inspector general at the federal level is going to make sure that, after the fact, similar to an auditor, is going to make sure that the federal awards, such as FEMA or things like that, that they followed the proper channels in their release of the funds.
Is that the General Accounting Office or what?
No, the General Accounting Office would be different than the Inspector General. The Inspector General is more of he would be closer to what we do, in other words, but he's not actually auditing based on auditing procedures. But he does have the Inspector General office, there would be different methods. He's that particular, and I don't mean to say he, but that particular office is going to be the one to make sure after the fact that a particular entity appropriately went through the process. FEMA is the one that comes to mind automatically, went through the appropriate process for getting those particular federal dollars.
Yeah.
And if they found out that something was wrong, they can ask for those dollars back. So that's why I say they're similar to an auditor. They just have a different title and different requirements. They're not going to follow government accounting, generally accepted government auditing standards or government accounting standards.
Yeah. So, I mean, just in looking briefly at data.iowa.gov, I mean, it seems like the clarity level is getting pretty good. What is the clarity level? How much of state expenditures are accounted for, and available in terms of availability to the public?
Everything. From what I can tell of the data.iowa.gov, I like the checkbook fiscal.iowa.gov. That's where Iowa expenditures are, and they have a comparative. Right now, we're in fiscal 15 right now. So if you went to checkbook.iowa.gov, you will see all the different departments, from education down to transportation, down to the capital, the administration, in other words, and you would just hover over whatever department you are looking at, and it'll give you comparative totals for the fiscal year. In other words, you can see a highbrow level of the expenditures for a particular department, and you can drill down to the checkbook level within that department. If you want to know how much the state auditor is traveling out of state, you can get down to that level. If you want to know what the state auditor's office has spent on office supplies, you can get down to that level. Or you can just see where I compare from fiscal 14 to current year.
No, that's great.
It's very good. I've loved it since it was put into play.
Yeah.
And I've steered a lot of people to that because they should have questions about how their tax dollars are being spent. So.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Well, that gives you the specificity that you need to actually say,
Right, because everybody has a different question. So this is meant to answer as many questions as possible. And I use it, but I didn't develop it. This was developed through the Department of Management. But I have steered people towards it for specific questions such as that. Mm-hmm. So.
And how long has this been up?
I should have that answer, and I don't. It's fairly recent. I'm going to say sometime this fiscal year it was up and running, maybe late last fiscal year, but relatively new. So it only has the two comparative year, fiscal 14 and fiscal 15 up right now. That'll switch, I'm assuming, from it'll have the fiscal 15 and fiscal 16. I don't know if it'll have 14 up there, but it right now has the two comparative years, so current year and previous year. So.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, imagine what something like that could do at the federal level. Correct.
That would be ideal. And that's another great point, and I don't know if you're actually asking that, but I love saying it. A lot of people ask me why the state auditor's office didn't prevent something from happening as far as inappropriate expenditures. That's because the state auditor's office is not the management of the individual state agencies. We're their auditor. We must maintain independence. We are not the decision maker in any of the audit or any of the entities that we audit. We want our different state agencies to answer our questions and verify to us the public purpose for each and every expenditure that they made. But we do not have authority to make their decisions. Mm-hmm. But the different state agencies should listen to the people who put them into office. A lot of directors of the different departments, they're appointed by the governor. Governor is elected by the people. All of our state General Assembly members who establish our laws, elected by the people. Those people that make our policy decisions, they are elected by the people, so people should feel comfortable telling their elected officials to be accountable with their money. Mm-hmm. And to tell them what's important to them, such as fiscally responsible expenditures, fiscally responsible spending. So approach those decision makers. I'll definitely do my part in asking questions of the different entities that we audit, but we don't have any decision-making authority. So.
Sure. So let's run through a couple of scenarios.
Yeah.
So now, if there's a program that shows promise, but it's struggling in the beginning. They're just not having the ROI numbers there.
Yeah.
But maybe there's other indicators that it's having a positive impact. How do you handle that situation?
And I'm going to veer off to a slightly different type of audit that we do, because that's what you're referencing. Performance audits, which is a specific type of audit that we do on state agencies as time allows. The other audits that I've been speaking about, those are your required annual financial statement audits, which have very defined procedures. But when we want to analyze the effectiveness of a program, a unique or a specific program within a department, that is titled a performance audit. And that's where we can get into some detail about consistencies, effectiveness, efficiencies that can be achieved. If we had more hours available, if we had more people, we know we could do more performance audits, and we know that that could be beneficial to state government, which would be beneficial to the people of Iowa. Those performance audits, we do as many as we can per year, but those we do fit into the hours we have available, and our statutory requirement is the financial statement audits, but we know how valuable those performance audits are. But should we find that something is or could be done more effectively, we report on it. We simply inform the state agency that we're working with what could be done more efficiently or more effectively. We give that report to the director of the state agency and usually the governor or Department of Administrative Services or Department of Management. We will give that report to whomever is connected to the agency that we are in, and then it's up to them to act on our recommendations or not. But those reports are all public, and typically what I've seen in my very brief time is, they try and act on our recommendations because we are in partnership with the entity that we are auditing, trying to serve the people of Iowa as best we can. So we're typically in there as a resource, not as not in any other way. We're there as a resource. So,
let's talk about a few other scenarios. But first, let's go to a break.
Okay.
And after we come back, I've got a couple other possibilities that I'd like you to comment on.
Certainly.
So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Ted.
We have Mary Mosiman. She is the auditor of the state of Iowa, and she is talking about accountable government today and some of the tools that Iowa has to bring that about. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll be back in a little bit.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
I'm Brian Leach, owner of Service Legends, and my position is Chief Talent Officer.
I'm Nicholas Wonderscheid.
I am Bernie Homs,
And I'm the Service Manager.
Marketing Director and Client Relations Manager.
Everything that we do is about ensuring that we exceed your expectations.
Our clients are important to us. 100% satisfaction.
We're not just focused on heating and cooling. That's the easiest part of our job, actually, is fixing furnaces and air conditioners.
Everyone that we come in touch with, we want to improve lives.
Bottom line is, we've got our installation guarantees, 25% energy savings guarantee, comfort guarantee, temperature selection guarantee, property protection guarantee.
100% satisfaction guaranteed. Fixed rate or it's free.
All of those guarantees are backed up with a 100% money-back guarantee to hold ourselves accountable to making sure that you get what you're after.
Just fixing the problem today. If they have another problem 5 days down the road, it's still fixed rate or it's free.
We use what's called straightforward pricing. Our technicians are going to give you an exact to-the-penny price on what it's going to take before they move forward with any repair. That way you know what to expect.
It's the same price every day.
No surprises.
If you get off work at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you come home, you realize that, my furnace is broken. Now you need to call somebody out that night. You shouldn't have to pay more for that.
We're guaranteeing service 24/7.
We run afternoons, evenings, nights, weekends. We're staffed to work that.
Phone rings at 3 in the morning. You'll get one of our representatives answering the phone every time.
We're not sending you out to Timbuktu in some call center. It's our Service Legend team members, our mission control team.
I'll take a call anytime.
And then they answer the phones the same way during the day as they do at night.
It's a great day at your service company. How can we make you smile?
That's the only way to provide true 24-hour service.
When you're able to let somebody actually live in their home safely when they weren't able to do that before, where they don't have to stay up at night and worry about, is the heat going to come back on? Are we going to freeze the pipes? Is the baby in the room next door going to be sick because they got too cold? When you're able to help somebody overcome challenges like that, that's impacting a life. That makes a difference. I get goosebumps thinking about it.
I love the team. I love the people that I work with.
We have fun, but we work hard.
I call them my ambassadors of legendary service. If you could just envision what that is, that's who we're sending to your home.
They literally will call in, pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I want to talk to your manager. And I get on the phone, they're like, that technician that was at my house was the greatest technician ever. That's cool to me.
We want to brighten people's days.
Every person that we have going into the house has gone through an extensive background check.
Drug testing, we have a very thorough interview process that 1 out of 140 people make it through.
If we promise you something, that's what you're going to get, no matter what.
We're here when you need us to protect the safety and comfort of your family.
If you're not happy, we're going to make it right.
If we're willing to put 100% money-back guarantee on what we do, what type of work do you think we do?
Give us a call. We're there for you 24/7, 365 days a year.
Enough said.
Hi, welcome back to Jet Radio. I'm Ted Char, your host, and with us today is Mary Mosiman. She is the auditor for the state of Iowa, and we're talking about accountable government. And Jet Radio is dedicated to community service as a means of sustainability. So let's run through a couple other scenarios.
Okay.
So, and you don't necessarily have to be an expert about this, but you have enough background where we can kind of envision some things that may be improvements for the future.
Okay.
So what if the federal government had this kind of system where there was enough clarity, down to the, hey, we spent this much on office supplies kind of thing, and that was organized and online for the general public? Would that create by itself, if it was clearly organized, would that by itself be enough to significantly raise the accountability of government spending?
It would definitely raise the transparency because access to information is the first step. Accountability does take action on those responsible with the funds. And being accountable means that you're going to provide due care, that you're going to, like we say at our office, make sure that every expenditure that you're considering has, it's reasonable, it's necessary, and it serves the public in some manner. And the harder it is to justify that public purpose, probably the harder it is to actually, for us to determine that was a necessary and reasonable expenditure. So if the transparency were to be raised at the federal level, where I think we all have a perceived idea that things at the federal level cost quite a bit more, or they pay quite a bit more than they might need to. And there is a long-standing tradition at government that you use it or you lose it at the end of a fiscal year. So things like that need to be undone, which is easier said than it is to accomplish. But that being said, accountability would be part of that, is making sure that even at the end of a fiscal year, before you roll over to the start of a new, that you're being accountable with every dollar, making sure that it's necessary and reasonable and in the interest of the public that you're serving, and not just spending the money because it's going to revert back to the primary operating fund for the government that you're working in.
Mm-hmm. So is there actually I know you mentioned the reports. Mm-hmm. If you've done an audit and something is necessarily up to the standards that it proposed,
right.
Is there actually a way to enforce consequences to the findings?
Right. Yes and no. For many of our recommendations, they are simply recommendations, and management of the government entity has the decision-making authority to either follow through with our recommendations and make the necessary or make the changes, or not. Segregation of duties is a key thing. We audit a lot of entities. We audit a lot of governments. The smallest of our government entities, we almost always have a segregation of duties comment or recommendation and how they can accomplish segregation of duties. And a lot of them respond with, we simply don't have enough personnel to provide segregation of duties. We try to give them methods of achieving that, even without hiring a second person or offering more hours or more pay. But that's a big one that we know that we have there's nothing we can do if they choose to simply get the same finding year after year after year. But when it comes to our single audit, and when we're telling the government entity that this particular finding could impede their ability for continuance of the grant, then they typically do act. So that's where I'm saying we are a resource to the government entities that we audit, because sometimes that's the first that they are aware that, oh, we missed that particular requirement in the grant procedures. So we can be a resource to the entity in making sure that they are fully compliant, or that they are compliant with the grant requirements or the federal funding requirements. Mm-hmm. So,
Right. So it seems like the options are the head of the relevant department takes a look at the report,
Right.
and then they say, well, hey, we're going to have to make changes A, B, and C,
Right.
in order to continue funding or something. But
Or they could risk losing the funding. We're just pointing out what we see that might need to be changed. We don't report it to the federal like, hey, this agency is non-compliant, so pull their funding. But we just point it out to them, and typically, once they realize that there's a weakness, they will make the change.
right. I mean, this may be unheard of in a government situation, but have you ever heard of a case where an agency head, had a program that wasn't working, and simply said, "Hey, this has been going on for several years. It's not working. Don't fund this program." Does that happen?
Not in that. Well, remember, I've only been your auditor for a couple of years. Not in that particular manner. I think they have noticed that something might not be working and attempted to make changes in how things are functioning. But I don't know that anybody's ever given the money back. If you don't mind, I'm going to revert back to when I was county auditor. I became the auditor at a very pivotal time in our nation's history because that's when we did not have a president easily determined, and we had recounts going on in Florida. Anyway, the federal government got involved and made a nationwide blanket change and established the Help America Vote Act that impacted our entire nation, and states received federal funds to improve the training of election officials, to improve the communication to the voters, and providing election equipment at their various precincts. Well, with federal money comes strings attached. So at one point, as the county auditor in Story, I was saying, let's give the money back, roll back the Help America Vote Act, because they basically doubled the cost of administering elections at the local level from that point forward. They established a federal agency entitled the Election Administration Commission. To the best of my knowledge, that's not an entity that has any decision-making authority at the point because they don't have any directors, but it's still an agency that exists, and one has to wonder why. Now, I'm not in that arena any longer, but I do know that that's an instance where, as a local official, I was wondering about the cost-benefit of a federal requirement when I realized technology was a huge part of that particular law. And as technology catches up with laws, should we or could we reevaluate the law to see if it could be implemented more effectively from this point forward? Because truly, the cost of elections has significantly increased, not only in Iowa, but elsewhere. So,
Well, maybe something could be included in a balanced budget law,
right.
where kind of a give back provision,
Right. And I do think that takes place because I know with the Affordable Care Act, the states, and I shouldn't speak with, because I'm again not a decision maker in that, but yeah, there's methods if you wanted to explore them, but it comes with a cost because it takes legal analysis, it takes effort, it takes a second plan to make sure that one can still carry out the procedures if you're going to not, I won't say comply, but not follow exactly with what the federal government wants you to do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and just to clarify, this is not at all about not helping people. I mean,
absolutely not.
Totally
So,
for
yeah,
helping people. It's
absolutely.
just about not wasting money, and,
Right.
and in fact, truly helping people with programs that are known to work. Because it actually doesn't to put people in programs that don't work is actually hurting them.
Absolutely. Government at whatever level is all about serving the people, and those people, once a service is in place, one tends to rely on that service. And we can speak about something that everybody uses, and that's going to be public safety. Well, maybe let's not. Let's talk about roads, bridges, sidewalks. Everybody uses roads, bridges, sidewalks if they go from point A to point B. so we all get that particular service. So you need to know that your government service is going to be sustainable, not just today, not just tomorrow, but into the future, meaning 5, 10, 20 years from now, which is why government needs to have a long-term plan for sustainability. And that's why I get concerned when I see the status of the expenditures of our different departments, because I worry about our sustainability without increased taxation on our population.
No, absolutely. Let's continue talking about that point exactly after we go to another break. We are with Mary Mosiman. She is the auditor for the state of Iowa. And yes, we'll be back to talk about fiscal sustainability when we return.
Credit cards are like grandkids. They love you, sometimes get out of control, and it's fun to get a new one. Who can stop them from piling on?
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of Des Moines. At the end of the day, you can return the grandkids, but you're stuck paying off bad credit card debt. We'll help you put the fun back into using credit cards responsibly. Right, kids?
Yeah!
If you need help getting credit cards off your back, call Consumer Credit of Des Moines.
Hi, welcome back to Jet Radio. I'm Ted Char, your host, and with us today is Mary Mosiman. She is the auditor for the state of Iowa, and we're talking about fiscal sustainability. So, let's continue that theme. Part of the reason why I left a safe federal job is because I wasn't sure that there was any point to continuing the whole time there when it's doubtful whether pensions are going to be there for us in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. What do you think about the people just joining federal service now or state service now?
I will speak at the state level. At Iowa, everybody knows we have IPERS, the Iowa Public Employee Retirement System. So that's the known one. We actually have 3 others. We have a total of 4 public pension systems. We have the judicial system, we have the peace officers retirement system, and we have I'm going to call it the 411 because it's chapter 411 in the Code of Iowa, but it impacts our largest of cities and their peace officers. So 4 public pension systems, and they're all approximately 70-some to 80-some% funded. They are a defined benefit versus a defined contribution. So the people who are public employees, they have a promise of the benefit that they will receive upon retirement. That's a promise that they need to be able to count on.
What does defined benefit versus defined contribution mean?
Defined benefit means that when you retire, you know exactly what your benefit will be, despite what's happened with the investments. Defined contribution is what your contribution will be. So all private systems are defined contribution. In other words, the defined benefit is fairly unique in pension systems, and states around our nation that have a defined benefit like Iowa has, some of them are changing. Some of them are going to a hybrid where they're having different mechanisms to provide their public pension systems, where a portion, like the people who are currently in the system, they continue with the defined benefit, but the new people coming in are either only defined contribution or defined contribution plus defined, a mixture of the two, so a hybrid. Some are just outright changing to defined contribution because when you think about it, you're putting money into it. It's going to be invested. In other words, what happens with the interest rates, what happens with your investments matters. And so when Iowa had a recession, consecutive years of recession several years back, in other words, the economics of the state, the economics of the nation impact everybody's pension system. So Iowa, I think it was the year 2000, Iowa's public pension, IPERS specifically, was 99 to 100% funded. And that dropped because of basically the economy and what was happening with investments, what was happening with interest rates. And so that's why we're currently only approximately 80% funded. So that does worry me because that's a big unfunded liability to make up for our future or the future people, the people that are young and new into the workforce, into the public workforce. So will it be the same for them? Will they have 100% benefit waiting for them when they retire 30 some years from now or not? So that's why I tell people all the time, pay attention when you hear the term pension reform, because quite frankly, a couple of years, the 2013 legislative session, the General Assembly passed a bill that would have brought the judicial system and the peace officers' retirement system up to 80% funding level, which was where IPERS was at the time. But it would have been pretty much on the backs of taxpayers. And the governor did veto that particular bill, or that particular legislation at that point in time. But that's why, and I'm really paraphrasing, but in his veto message, he mentioned pension reform, largely because I think he wanted to make sure that it wasn't only on taxpayers, the taxpayer portion of the equation that was being impacted. You have to pay attention when it's a public pension system, even if you're not a public employee, because, again, there's only two components of revenue for a public pension system, employees and employers, so it impacts everybody. But promises to public employees is critical, is important. They can't have that promise be taken away from them, or what happens to service at the government level. And that, again, service that impacts all of Iowa. So maintaining the promise to the public employees is critical. So it's just a situation for policymakers to be aware of and for people to be communicating to their decision makers so we can have input and we can have accountability for these things that affect all of us.
Sure. Yeah. Critical, but is it possible? So this, again, it's a pretty good benchmark because if Iowa is one of the top states fiscally, and we're only at 80%, well, like I said, I think that's pretty good, relatively speaking, 80% funded.
Agreed.
But that means that some people are not currently funded, but then it begs the question, what about Illinois, the worst state, the state in the worst shape, and lived in Chicago as well for a few years, and the corruption in the pension system there is astronomical, and there's people that are closer to the inside there that recognize that as a city that's probably worse off than Detroit in some ways in terms of their obligations.
Right.
And so if I was 80% funded, what is Illinois? It's got to be very low. And so there's what will happen in those situations, so people need to begin planning for how to deal with situations where people are not if the money runs out and people are not getting the pensions that they were promised, there has to be some sort of planning for how that's going to be handled.
And our decision makers, our General Assembly, a few years back, when they recognized that our funding level had dropped from almost 100% funded to 80 some or 78% funded, they made some changes in the formula for IPERS. So they expanded the years that it takes to be vested. I think it went from 4 years to 7 years, something like that. They started increasing, because the contribution rates had not changed in several years, but they changed the contribution rates for both the employee and the employer. So a little more money was going in to help with that. And then we have an IPERS board that's made up of various individuals. They started paying attention, not that they weren't paying attention to the investment side, but all of a sudden not all of a sudden, I don't mean to speak like that, but they were paying attention to what was happening with the investments of IPERS. So realizing that that's what can happen, not overnight, but it can happen relatively suddenly based on what's happening at the national and the state economies. So when we lost funding fairly rapidly because of investments, because of economy, they knew they had to the decision makers knew they had to make some changes, and they did. So that's what has stabilized us. Otherwise, we'd be less than 80% funded at this point in time if we had not made some changes. Policymakers are keeping that in mind. I credit communication, people talking to them about it, knowing that they have to keep on top of this in order for our public employees to be able to have the promises maintained, and for our up-and-coming young government workers, they need to have something as well. So everybody should. Retirement's inevitable, voluntary or not. So those retirement systems need to be in place for the people who have put either time and or money into them. So
yeah, well, in some ways, the waste in government can be seen as a reserve in terms of, hey, there's some obvious places where money is being wasted.
Right.
Therefore, it means that money could be saved, and is a potential reservoir for making up for some of those gaps, I guess.
Yeah, it would be good, or it would be different, I guess, if government did have a method of saving money. Reserve funds are a method of that, but reserve funds have a statutory cap, and every dollar beyond that cap is automatically surplus carry forward, which then our decision makers have a decision to make. What do you do with that surplus carry forward? I would advise they spend it on one-time expenditures, not on ongoing expenditures, because you never know if you're going to have surplus carry forward the following year, because it also depends on multiple factors. It depends on the different departments and what they spend throughout a year, and it depends on our revenues and how they come in. And that's going to depend on the people of Iowa, their personal income tax, their sales tax, their use tax, the corporate income tax, all the sources of taxes, and other factors such as our gambling revenue, our tobacco revenue, things like that. So our revenue sources are fluid and they depend on the people, but it is something that impacts our surplus carry forward at the end of a fiscal year. So.
Yeah. How much is the gambling revenue?
Ooh, good question. I won't be able to give you an exact figure on that, but it's, of all of our revenue sources, it's a small percentage. Okay. And it helps fund a lot of our departments. So, and it's spread out over different funds. So,
well, that was the one item that I think Governor Branson had mentioned at one time, that he wishes he wouldn't have funded that bill. So
it's not our most prominent revenue source. So, but it's definitely a revenue source. So.
Yeah. Hey, really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I think you've really raised the clarity level here in terms of how some of the process works and some of the things that we can do to create more accountable government. So,
thanks again for having me, and thanks for all the conversation that I've read about and heard about. So I appreciate your topic here. So
yeah. So with us today has been Mary Mosiman. Excuse me. She is the auditor for the state of Iowa. And join us again on Jet Radio for our continuing discussion of community sustainability. Thanks for joining us today.